slide. Go ahead and put that first slide up there for me with the beautiful picture. Yeah. Isn't that lovely, you guys? I absolutely love that. Okay, so that is actually a real picture of my foot. So 2 days before Christmas, I was flipping a table, and what that means, if you don't know, is not like how Jesus flipped the tables, but like I refinish tables and then sell them. So I was flipping this table, and I had the chairs lined up in the hallway so that the poly could cure for a couple days before I gave it back to the client. And chairs don't belong in our hallway, so I wasn't used to that. And I was just casually walking past one of them and clipped my pinky toe ever so slightly on that chair and broke my toe. And it was definitely not pleasant. And, you know, people would ask me, hey, what happened to your foot? And I didn't want to say that. I was just casually walking past a chair, right? That's not cool. So I was like, dude, I was jumping out of a burning building while saving a puppy. And then Carrie actually believed that, which was the best thing ever. So anyways, I also am a mom. And if you know anything about how moms operate, I looked at that broken toe and I was like, I got work to do. So I just ignored it and pushed through the pain, and I'd vacuum and do my dishes and try and go on doing normal life. But as time went on, that got increasingly more difficult. My foot got more painful. I found it harder to do the things that I needed to do. Now, my husband has had this injury before, this exact same injury, doing the same thing in the same place. And so he was watching me just try and superwoman my way through this, and he was going, no, constantly telling me, you need to get off of it. You need to put your feet up. You need to put ice on it. And I'm like, well, then who is going to do all the things if I'm doing that? So, of course, I ignored him, you know, like a good wife. And he was like, you need a boot. You need to be in crutches. You need a boot. You need a boot. And I was like, I don't need a boot. I don't need a boot. So we actually have Jason and Lori Hicks are here, and they're laughing because they know where I'm about to go. So we went to go visit them the week after Christmas up at their house in Missouri. And I brought some boots with me, and I couldn't put it on, like it hurt too bad. And so we were driving all over Jefferson City, literally like every single medical pharmacy store that exists in that city, and could not find a boot anywhere. So I wasn't able to wear one, and we weren't able to do as much of the fun touristy stuff. But that was so important to my husband, and he was the one that was really driving that. He's like, no, if we're going to go do touristy things, you have to be in a walking boot, period. Like, that's it. And then it didn't happen. So I tell this story to say, how weird would it be? Like, just think for a minute. Imagine if when I noticed that my foot wasn't getting better, and I started to complain to my husband that, hey, I'm actually not able to do the things that I need to be doing because of my injury and because of this pain that I'm in, what would have happened if he would have looked at that and been like, you know what I think? I think you're just not in your word enough. That would be weird, right? Like, we'd be like, that's not like how you necessarily respond to a medical condition, right? Or maybe, what if he said, like, you know, when I see that injury, I'm thinking that maybe you're suffering because you've got some secret sin somewhere. Like, nobody would say that, right? That wouldn't happen. But historically, that is how Western Christianity has approached mental health. And yes, absolutely, leaning into Jesus when I'm in pain or frustrated that I can't get done the things that I need to be getting done, or really asking the Holy Spirit for comfort and peace when I am having complete anxiety because I can't work now and I'm losing money and I have bills to pay. Yes, absolutely, I need to be leaning into Jesus for all of those things in that time. So that's not untrue, but also, I needed a walking boot. Like, that's so practical, right? So that is how I started approaching mental health as well. Mental health is health because your brain is actually a part of your physical body. And to some people, that is actually kind of a revolutionary concept. It's also the part of the body that doctors and scientists know the least amount about. It's such a mystery. People dedicate their whole entire careers to learning and studying this mysterious thing, and they know that they've only scratched the surface of all the information that is available to them about the human brain. Here's just a little tiny snippet of what we do know. So when we experience trauma, our brains shut down the non-essential system and they activate the sympathetic nervous system, releasing stress hormones that activate your flight or fight. How many of you guys learned about fight or flight in school? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Those exist to help us survive an experience. And the more that psychiatrists are learning about this nervous system and how this all works and expanding their definitions of trauma, they're now expanding that definition of the stress response to include flight, fight, freeze, and appease. Those last two are usually the kind of stress responses that you see in children when they're growing up and they suffer trauma and their brains are developing. They get into the freeze and appease modes. So these experiences establish something called neural pathways. So neural pathways are the connecting neurons that send signals from one part of your brain to another. So essentially, that is your brain's communication system, or like a roadway map that gets designed and cuts new roads to get here and there within your thought processes. The connectors that are inside of these neural pathways that kind of build them together, so like the intersection of all of these, are called dendrites. And these dendrites increase in number with the frequency that the behavior is being done, and that further solidifies the pathways and then reinforces those behaviors. So these reinforced pathways, they don't just tell us what to think. Like, that would be so easy if that's all they told us is what to think, because then someone could come along and just be like, well, don't think that, think this instead. And we'd be like, yes, I am cured. How many of you guys are parents that would just love it if you could tell your teenage kids what to think? That would just make everything so much easier. And then they would actually just like, oh yeah, you're totally right, you're so wise, and then change their behaviors and make sense, right? But that's not how it works, unfortunately. These neural pathways tell us how to think and behave based on the patterns that are given to them by our experiences. And these pathways, they aren't just created by our own choices. In fact, most of the time, they're created by the choices of other people that are done to us. So if you had neglectful or abusive parents, if you lived through extreme poverty where every day feels like a fight to survive, a fight to get food, a fight to keep your lights on, a fight to pay your rent, the loss of a loved one, or having to earn love through performance, all of these things create neural pathways that train our brains how to think, how to respond, and how to behave. And I know that sounds really kind of dark and down, but there's really good news. God made our brains malleable. Raise your hand if you know what that word means, malleable. Yeah, that means you can move it and change it. It's bendy, it's not permanent. And even well into adulthood, our brains can actually create new neural pathways. So when you hear people say that old saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, you can tell them, actually, that is not true, and science says otherwise. The word for this, does anybody know what the word for this is? Like the sciencey word? Is it already up there? No, it's not up there. Okay, what's the word for this? Anybody know? Yeah, neuroplasticity. That is actually the scientific word for this. Yeah. All right, so we're going to watch a video that's like 2 minutes. It's really quick. It's a really good video that kind of paints a picture of what neuroplasticity is and how it works. All right, so go ahead and play that video.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently. learn a new task, or choose a different emotion, we start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
I love that absolutely simple explanation of how that all works. So, like seeking a walking boot for my brain, I started looking into ways to improve my mental health. So one of the things that I do is I treat my ADHD with medication. And I do this because not only do I enjoy starting to unload the dishwasher, but I also enjoy finishing unloading the dishwasher without taking 2 hours in between to just pace around my house, living inside of my imagination. It's pretty great. Also good, returning text messages. I've gotten about 30% better at doing that. Yeah, my husband's like, yeah. Pretty great. I also decided to take advantage of my brain's neuroplasticity by starting therapy. And it's been really, really good, you guys. It's been a partnership with the Holy Spirit and a person who studies the science of the brain, working through things, working through trauma, working through abuse, overcoming those things. It's been really amazing. During one of our sessions, she described to me how all of that worked. And I remember actually just breaking down and crying because I was so overcome with this incredible sense of hope that the way that my thoughts worked because of the trauma that I've experienced did not have to be the way that my thoughts had to stay. And that there exists a healthy and whole way to actually think and to be. And I knew, because I've been in church a long time, so I've always known that with Christ that was possible. I just didn't know the practical application steps of how to get there. So I've had mental health issues like anger, which I've shared with you guys before, my story about anger, that have been just miraculously healed by spending time with Jesus. Like I had the anger, I asked God to help me with it, and then one day I woke up and literally just did not have the anger anymore. I can't explain it. That was a miraculous spiritual event that happened. And I have mental health issues from trauma and abuse that are currently being overcome in therapy. And I have mental functioning issues and deficiencies that are being treated with medication. None of those things are any less than the other because each one of those things are being worked out and propelling me towards doing and being all of the things that God has called me to do, to actually live healthy and happy, to step out in the giftings and the calling that He has for my life, to walk in my purpose and fulfill those things and to help and to love other people. And whichever means of getting there that there is, which for me is like all over the place, are all pointing me towards God's will for my life and God's plan for my life. And that's what He wants for all of you guys too, to work towards His purpose and His calling for your life. And if that means overcoming mental health objectives, then that's okay. And this is a safe place to talk about those things. This is a safe place to work those things out and to do those things. All right, so I'm going to hand this over to Andy, and he is going to finish up. Thank you, guys.